Welcome to the latest episode of USC Trojans Primetime Live on the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football. I'm Matt Zemek. He's Ethan Inman. Not the most jam-packed news cycle right now. Big Ten media days are still about 4 weeks away. That's when it's going to feel like the beginning of the season. Obviously, then when preseason camp gets going, then it truly feels like the season, because then we'll have observations of players every day. It's practice directly for the season. It's a little bit different from spring ball, but we're not there yet. But we do have some recruiting items to hit on. So, Ethan, as we start the show, and first off, folks, if you want to call into the show, we're sharing the StreamYard link. Just put it in the chat. So if you want to come in with your comments, questions, concerns, there you go. Definitely welcome your input here at the Voice of College Football. But Ethan, just your reaction to the multiple additions to the 2026 recruiting class, and it's a weird dynamic. We're thinking about the 2026 recruiting class, even though this is the off season before the 2025 campaign begins. At Alabama, they're not thinking about the 2026 recruiting class. Ohio State, Texas, because they all think they can make the playoff. I mean, we'll get to kind of the big picture, but first, let's hit on the new additions to the Trojan family.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, USC, since the last time we spoke, Matt, has added two really big names. The first one was on Sunday. It was Talanoa Ely, who chose USC over UCLA. And it was really great to see, just because he's a linebacker, which is not a particularly strong position in recruiting for USC in recent years. But, obviously now with Rob Ryan, that kind of changes the game for USC. So, and he said that Rob Ryan played kind of a big part in the reason why he decided to commit, as well as, USC's momentum in recruiting. So that's also great to hear. I think hearing that, recruiting doesn't just matter to us fans and all of this momentum that they've created around the 2026 recruiting class, but it's also directly impacting recruiting other players. That just makes you feel better, because I think kind of the balance is between, USC having such a big, I think it's 30 members big now as the 2026 recruiting class, is is that enticing for other players, or does it get crowded at some point and they're afraid that they won't be able to stand out? What's the balance there? But for Talanoa Ely, it seemed like that was particularly inspiring for him and not something that deterred him. So that was a really positive note, I think, there from him. And then today, the big one was Luke Waffle, who is 6'5", 255-pound defensive lineman. There was a whole bidding war, a lot of drama that went down today between USC and Ohio State. He was predicted by On3 to go to USC, flipped to Ohio State, flipped back to USC. There's kind of this whole NIL bidding war that I guess was going down. The NIL package of his ended up settling around, On3 says, around 2.2 to 2.6 million over 2 years, which is obviously a lot, especially, given that he's a 4-star defensive lineman and not a 5-star quarterback or something like that. And then Coach Henney, Coach Nua, and Dan Lynn were all heavily involved, apparently. And then the only kind of downside of this is USC was recruiting another defensive lineman, KJ Ford, who's now, I think, probably in light of this news, more heavily considering Ohio State than USC, because he's taking his official visit to USC, or to Ohio State this weekend instead of USC. So that's the only downside there. But I mean, Luke Waffle was kind of the biggest prize here. He was somebody that USC and Ohio State really both kind of heavily had their eyes on. And it's really exciting for USC to go head-to-head with the program that just, we're just the national championships, and we're just the national champions in just this past season, and be able to kind of outbid them and, kind of out-recruit them for one of the top players in the country. So, I mean, anytime you can do that when you're a team that went 7-6, there's obviously something really special going on in the building. So it just, it continues to pile up wins for Chad Bowden and this program. And they're finally figuring out how to use that massive NIL collective and, all the money that there is at USC to their advantage. So really great to see there, and really excited about both those guys for sure.
Comment from our friend Jeff Rodriguez: we're done on the defensive line. I mean, and whether or not we are done, I agree with Jeff, but just for the sake of debate, just for the sake of conversation, Ethan, even if we're not done, we're pretty darn close. And the larger point to make here is that like 2025 is going to be the last year in which we say, well, USC doesn't have the bodies up front. I'm like that is the big picture takeaway, that USC is not going to get caught shorthanded, under resourced next year, because this is how the big boys do it, right? This is how Bama, Ohio State, Texas, like it's not just having the star ratings, it's having the bulk, it's having the volume, right? Because if a couple guys go down or they don't pan out, you can replenish very readily. You can turn, next man up. He's still third, fourth, fifth on the depth chart. Those are high quality additions, hungry players waiting for their turn. Like this is how Nick Saban and Kirby Smart did it before the NIL and transfer portal era. Okay, someone goes off to the pros or someone gets hurt. We have a big dog third in line, fourth in line. That's how they became so dominant. And so USC is playing in the big leagues at that level for next year's class. Not yet this year, but like this year will mark the end of USC getting caught shorthanded. That really is a great thing to contemplate.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And obviously next year we're going to have those big recruits coming in on the defensive line. But even this year, we've talked about how they're bringing in some more size than they've normally had. And they have Jakeem Stewart, who's kind of the big prospect who everybody's going to have a lot of eyes on in the defensive line, that 5-star. So it's, and especially too with the new strength coach, I think that, it's all, they're sending it into motion a little bit this year. And something really interesting that I saw too, I really briefly saw it as I was scrolling through Twitter today, but Chad Bowden was talking to Josh Pate in kind of a one-on-one interview. And he asked him about, this recruiting and how USC has just been able to amass so many, recruits this early in the game, and whether or not that rankings really matter to Bowden. And Chad Bowden's response, I think, was really telling, because he said that he likes recruiting early. And if you look back at, what he's kind of done in the last few years with Notre Dame, he was in a similar spot with Notre Dame at this point in the year. Like he always had one of the top classes, close to number one overall really early on with Notre Dame. And he said the reason why is because he likes to be a culture. He likes to set the culture as early as possible. He likes to get players in the building, kind of connect them to one another, connect them to the coaches, connect their parents and families to each other, so that, you can kind of start building this vision for what, the USC football team could be before these players even step on campus. And I think that that's, a little bit of what needs to happen this year too. So I'm really glad that he's, kind of setting that vision. And, this year isn't necessarily expected to be the kind of national championship caliber year that next year's, supposed to be, considering how much recruiting we've gotten in. But I think, it's never too early to start rebuilding, especially the culture. USC women's basketball fans will know, like, all too well how much culture matters, and how Lindsey Gottlieb started inputting that as soon as she stepped on campus, even though the talent wasn't there. It's the same situation here. So kind of glad to see that from him as well.
One of the things you mentioned in terms of USC's recruiting wins, I mean, they're coming against other schools where like getting a recruit is a victory, is a plus in its own right, but like beating UCLA for one recruit and beating Ohio State, like, if you were going to pick a pair of opponents, I think like Notre Dame would be the only other one you'd put like in the same weight class, or maybe Michigan as well. But like beating Ohio State, that's your national prestige. Beating UCLA, that's your local recruiting war. So being able to score wins, like any recruiting wins, great, but recruiting wins over those two schools got to feel extra special, Ethan Inman.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, USC has just been kind of completely embarrassing the rest of the Big Ten so far. Not embarrassing. There's other Big Ten schools that are recruiting well, but, USC just continues to win seemingly all the most important and the most kind of covered recruiting battles, it's always USC coming out on top, and not Oregon and not Ohio State and not UCLA like you mentioned. I think the kind of Talanoa Ely kind of going down to it being USC or UCLA was a really interesting dynamic. I think it was really interesting that he did that because, on one hand, like schools, players don't always like come out and admit that they're down to 2 schools right before, sometimes it's like 4 or 5, and he narrowed it all the way down to 2, but also he narrowed it down to 2 like hated rivals. So it was interesting. It was, like you really didn't know exactly where he stood because he was, seemingly considering being on either side of the rivalry at that point. But I think it's a little bit credit to UCLA. I think that they've done a better job in recruiting this year than they have in recent years. And it's, really credit to Deshaun Foster. And I think a lot of their fans are really happy with what's going on. Their standards are not as high as USC's, obviously. But, they're making some noise. And I think on like a really broad scale, it's not the worst thing for USC because you want West Coast football to be attractive, and anytime West Coast football is kind of gaining momentum in the national eye, that's somewhat a good thing as long as they're not winning the bigger recruits, which I don't think USC needs to worry about them winning. But it was kind of cool to see that one and see how that played out. It was kind of fun, just and I think I was pretty assured, and so were a lot of people, that he was going to pick USC. I don't think a lot of people thought that there was a real chance that he was going to pick UCLA. So it was more like a, intrigue, like pay attention to which side of the rivalry I end up on. But it was cool. He's he's from the area, and used to play ball in the area before he went out to play in Hawaii. So it was a cool little announcement, and it added a little bit of extra drama, I think. But yeah, and then, like I said, anytime you go head to head with the team that just won the national championship and you get into, a war, whether it's, directly money related, which it seems like this one was pretty financially related, or, just recruiting related otherwise, and you beat them, like, all power to you. That's always good for your program. And like I said, too, this winning these recruits is mattering to other recruits. Like, it's inspiring a lot of them, like Talanoa Ely said, to, they're seeing other top recruits pick USC, and they're like, they're considering USC more heavily. They're like, there must be something to it. And then, they are all kind of inspiring this collective belief in one another that maybe we could win a national championship. And so, all of that kind of collectively is really creating a lot of positive momentum for USC. So all of it's great to see, for sure.
All right. Archer Quick mentions that, another recruit committed to Oregon. We all know in our USC shorthand, that's what the zeros mean, the number of national championships, right? So I bring this up just because, a year ago, we'd be cursing the darkness when Oregon gets a pretty notable recruit. Now, and like Mad Men is my favorite show of all time. I have a lot of favorite shows. Mad Men for me is number 1. And I go back to Don Draper with Ginsburg in the elevator. And Don Draper says, I don't think about you at all. That's USC's attitude to Oregon now that everything's changed, right? We don't care about Oregon recruiting. Not when we're crushing it, right? Like we're getting so many good players. Hey, Oregon, if you want these table scraps, if you're going to get these other recruits, I don't care about you at all. I mean, in the sense of we're getting what we need to get. We're doing what we need to do. I certainly hope everyone in the chat watching here at the Voice of College Football that we're not sweating who Oregon is or isn't getting anymore. Like, that is the beauty of crushing it on the recruiting trail. You don't have to have that anxiety each day, each week. Who's Oregon going to get next? I don't think about you at all. Like, we do not need to, measure ourselves closely against Oregon. We can just say, hey, we're back to being USC. We're back to the gold standard. We're back to, hey, we're doing it the way we're supposed to be doing it. And when we do it the way we are supposed to be doing it, we're good. And it doesn't matter what anybody else is doing. We're setting the standard. We're leading the pack. Ethan, it's got to be a great liberation for USC fans to not have to, lose sleep at night about who Dan Lanning's going to get next. We don't care about them at all. Not now. Like we did the past few years, because it was a real source of annoyance. And of course, that was a continuation of the Clay Helton era. Clay Helton failing to build the fence around Southern California, going back to Mario Cristobal as well before Dan Lanning. But now we don't have to worry about that sort of thing, or do we?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair to, some of the fans in the chat that seem to be a little frustrated with Jet Washington, I mean, this is the nephew of Kobe Bryant and also the number one player that the Ducks have gotten so far. So he's not, it's not a small thing for USC to miss out on him. I mean, he's not a SoCal guy. He's out of Bishop Gorman in Vegas. So it's not, like as big of a miss, but it still hurts a little bit. Like you want to get, anyone who's related to Kobe and you want to keep them in Southern California. And especially, given that he plays the safety position and is just such a high recruit up there. I mean, he's headlining Oregon's class now. It hurts for sure. But I think the grand scheme of what you're saying is still true. I think that USC still has some bigger fish that they're going to kind of rope in this 2026 recruiting class. And so, it's not like this is not as devastating as it would have been in past years. USC not getting Jet Washington. I think especially because they got RJ Sermons in and they're getting him in this year because he reclassified. I think that's also that also softens the blow a little bit because RJ Sermons is very good at football. But yeah, it's still, this recruit is specifically is going to hurt a little bit more than others would have, just because of like I said, the relation to Kobe, and then also the kind of level of talent that he's displayed and how high his rankings are. But yeah, generally what you're saying is correct. I don't think this hurts as much as in past years, and I think we have some we still have some bigger fish, and our class is already so big too. It doesn't hurt as much as in past years, and it hopefully won't hurt as much. It'll hurt even less down the road when we get some even bigger fish in the building.
Speculative question. If Taylor Mays was still on the USC staff, you think this recruitment ends differently? Like, none of us can know for sure, but do you think that there's anything to that entirely speculative question?
I think there might be. I think that there definitely is something to it. I think that getting these legends kind of out to recruiting and out to practice and all that stuff matters to players. I think that anytime, like the recruits, get to rub shoulders with guys like Ronnie Lott and like Taylor Mays, it makes an impression on them because it sets kind of the vision that this is the kind of player that I'm aspiring to be, and you can become this kind of player at USC. Like this, I'm just following in the footsteps of a path that was already walked. It's not like, at a small Division I or big Division II school where it's like, you may have one or two legends, but like generally it's like a lot more difficult, and you have to be a really exceptional kind of prospect. Like the walk has been walked at USC a lot. The road has been paved, and all you have to do is kind of like, follow in those footsteps essentially. So yeah, I think every time it matters for sure. I don't know. I'd have to it'll be interesting to see, some of the details of what Oregon offered Jet in NIL, and also even if he stays committed, because Oregon's had a lot of decommitments. So it's, until he steps foot on the football field in an Oregon Duck uniform, I'm not 100% convinced that he'll stay there. But I think, yeah, it's possible. But I'd be curious to see some more details on what kind of got him to Oregon in the first place first.
So, one vein of analysis that this discussion really opens up is that, all right, we're recruiting at an elite level, so maybe, we don't have to worry about what other teams do. But, you made the point that, hey, like this guy really did matter. Like this guy could have added unique value to USC that other players wouldn't have. So that brings up the point that if USC is recruiting at an elite level for 2026, the concern might be, not so much the star ratings, but this gets into the player evaluation element. That does this 4-star fit our scheme better than that 4-star? Does this 4-star have better character and better intangibles than that 4-star? This is really going to show if the general overall quality, ratings, volume, if that translates into results. And of course, we're a year away from finding out. It's not as though this is going to be validated or refuted this fall. It's going to still take a while, but it does bring up the point that, all right, if certain players really do matter a little more than others, then USC's recruiting ratings shouldn't be seen as the complete coup and triumph that they are, because this stuff needs to translate. It needs to go from potential to actualization. So, in my mind, USC has coaches with really good chops. Danton Lynn, Coach Henney, woof woof. Rob Ryan, whose NFL background is obviously resonating with recruits. Doug Belk as well in the secondary, clear upgrade from what we had with Dante Williams. So to me, the fact that you have such sharp, knowledgeable coaches who are much better than, Manning, Odom, Dante, the previous, Alex Grinch, of course, last but not least, because you have so many upgrades on the defensive staff, I think that might be the thing that kind of solidifies the value of the recruiting class, because that you're not just getting high-end groceries. You have people who are going to cook a high-end meal, a gourmet meal with those groceries. I think that's a really important point for USC fans to absorb.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And that's another point that Chad Bowden made in that interview with Josh Pate that I mentioned earlier, is because Josh Pate asked him if rankings matter to him. And he said a lot about culture, but he also said getting the right kids in the building matters. And he doesn't care as much about ratings ratings obviously matter. People who make ratings are, some of the foremost experts on talent evaluation in football and all the world. So it's not like people are just like randomly, clicking a couple of stars and like hoping that they're right. Like, the people who make these ratings are professionals, and they're very good at what they do. But so naturally what, their star rating is going to match up a lot with what, universities end up thinking of those players. But he said that recruiting doesn't matter as much as it is getting the right kids in the room, which I think is, kind of an important note from him. And I hope that turns out to be true, that, USC is really evaluating these players for fit, and, they have to be good, but they also have to fit. And, fitting Danton Lynn's scheme, fitting the Big Ten, fitting, their individual position coaches, what talent's already at the individual positions. There's a lot of fit things to consider. So yeah, obviously that's going to be a reason why you don't sign every 4 and 5 star, and also sometimes it just comes down to what a prospect wants. Like, USC is not going to be every prospect's flavor, and that's fine. There's USC is a very particular type of university, and there's a lot of different types of universities in this country. And, not everyone's going to want the kind of high profile, LA life that you kind of get when you come to USC. And you can convince a lot of people to come and have it because it's, a really wonderful university experience, but it's, a lot of different personalities out there, a lot of different players. So not always gonna line up. But yeah, I think so in this situation with Jet, I think that could have been an issue, because from what I heard, he just really liked Oregon a lot. And, sometimes that's just kind of, what it comes down to. Maybe he likes Eugene better, maybe he likes the campus better, maybe he's more of an outdoorsy guy and he, wants to spend his weekends hunting or fishing or whatever, and he likes that better up in Oregon. So sometimes that stuff's going to happen. But, obviously he's a football player, so he has to consider his football first and foremost. But, when you have a couple of good football programs that are recruiting you, it's going to come down to things like that sometimes. But yeah, I think that kind of, like you said, um, they're I think that they are considering that, and I hope that um, is really something that the players are considering as well, because you want to retain as much of this class as you can. You know, dollar signs and stuff are great, but I hope that they're really heavily considering if USC is the right fit for them, and when they're committing to multiple years, and they're not just kind of committing to the dollar sign and not really considering all the factors, which I think that they are. A lot of the prospects that we've gotten in, what I've heard from them, they all really seem like really solid players who really kind of fit the identity that USC is going after. So, yeah.
Really interesting comment here from Russ Campbell, one of our regular viewers here at the Voice of College Football. Russ says, the fact we got so many of these kids really early in the cycle tells me they fit the scheme. It's the really late signees that you might be trying to square peg round hole. Okay, Russ, I do not follow the recruiting industry at a detailed, granular enough level to be able to say you're exactly right. But I will say your point makes sense. Like there's a logical framework to it that if people are committing early, they obviously sense that yes, there is compatibility here. They're not scrambling. They're not kind of chasing. That there's clarity of vision. There's alignment. So that's a really good point there. Gixxer Squid chimes in. Matt, how quick of an impact do you think Luke will make? What do you attribute the growth of higher recruits joining on the defensive side of the ball? Well, in terms of how quickly players are going to grow, I want to see camp, and I want to see how they fit in, and in terms of live reps and blending in with the team. In June, I just do not if you ask me about Jaden Mayava, I don't know what Jaden Mayava is going to bring to USC. I obviously hope it's going to be the best. I can see a good scenario. I can see a bad scenario playing out. So it's similar with just about every other unproven player. So I'm not gonna put down a marker. It's just too early. I need to see something tangible before I have more of a feel and can make a stronger prediction. But the second question, what do you attribute the growth of higher recruits joining the defensive side of the ball? I think it's pretty simple. That you have some stone cold professionals on the defensive side of the ball, and Lincoln Riley finally stockpiling real pros, elite coaches in terms of technique, in terms of culture, in terms of work ethic, and now supplemented by Trumaine Carroll, Coach Carroll at USC. There's a product, there's a professionalism that we didn't have on this staff a couple years ago. And recruits can see that. Recruits can see that. They can understand it. They know that it means it's their ticket, not just to the NFL, but to a good placement on the draft board, which is real dollars, for a professional future. So all of that, USC has, in terms of USC staff, the defense is where the superstars are. Now, Lincoln Riley, he had several great years as a play caller, but of course he stepped into a pothole last season. But the other point to remind everyone about is that, USC does not yet have a proven skull crusher at offensive line coach. That is what we need to see. I think that's the big question regarding this year's team. It was the big question for last year's team, and it didn't quite hit the mark. It wasn't awful, but it wasn't the elite standard. So, on the defensive side of the ball, there's a stone cold pro coaching every position group with an elite coordinator who knows exactly what he's doing. Recruits can see, how well run this ship is. They want to be part of it. It just makes sense. So thank you, Gixxer, for those questions. Ethan, any comments on either this or on Russ Campbell's point about, the early cycle recruits, being the scheme fits, and the late signees, the late enrollees, maybe being more scramble type situations?
Yeah. First on Gixxer's question, I think it's like you said. I mean, we haven't seen Luke Way full on campus yet, so it's hard to project super early. But from everything that I've seen, he's really muscular, but also it's a lot of really lean muscle, and he's really fast. So he should be, someone who's really disruptive in the backfield. And he's, someone who has proven himself against a lot of college adjacent talent in high school, a lot of like college prospects and kind of college size. So yeah, he's for sure a guy who I could see contributing early, like Mark Bowman. Sorry, Matt, did I blink out for a second there?
It could be from my end. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry about that, guys. I think my my Wi-Fi took a bit of a hit there. But yeah, I think that he certainly could contribute early, and yeah, definitely recruiting is in large part due to the staff being shored up, and I think also the NIL getting in order, and also last year, I think that USC went out and proved that they can have a good defense. It wasn't a great defense. It wasn't an elite defense, but it was a good defense. It was a defense with stars on it. It was a defense that made plays. It was a defense that had some swag. So, USC proved that they're not just, an offensive. They're not going to become just this offensive juggernaut that, throws defense to the wind under Lincoln Riley. Like they're a school that prioritizes defense, and you can come and be an elite defensive player and an elite potential defensive draft pick at the school. So I think that played a part in it. And it's not just one and done guys either, like, Tuli Pelotu, because, across the defense last year, guys were showing potential. It was already developed guys that came in like Kamari Ramsey and the Arnold brothers, but there was also guys like Cameron Fountain on the defensive line who were freshmen that, got less playing time, but still showed some potential. Some of that younger talent was able to showcase what they had a little bit. So, it showed that there was definitely a lot more balance than just USC plugging all the holes and that being it. But so I think last year's performance definitely matters as well. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on that. And I look forward to seeing the defense continue to improve, because I think the more years that you have Danton Lynn in the building, and the more time that he has to develop his guys that he got in the building, it's just going to get better and better.
All right, folks, more from Ethan Inman and myself here at the USC channel at the Voice of College Football. But first, for the next minute, so this is the time to take a bathroom break or get a drink. For the next minute, I'm going to pay some bills with a word from our sponsor. See you in 1 minute on the other side.
You can make a difference here at the Voice of College Football. Use the Amazon link. Financially contribute to the Voice of College Football without spending a penny. Same shopping experience. It's easy. Go to any video on any channel. Go to the description section and grab the link right next to the capital letters that say Amazon. Use that link, and Amazon will instantaneously convert to your account, settings, history, everything intact, just like whatever link you use right now. No difference. Pay no attention to the product that you see right there. Just go search what you want. Don't forget the Amazon link. Thank you for your support. Sincerely, the Voice of College Football.
Mark Rogers is the voice of college football. You can catch his national college football show every weekday, Monday through Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. Obviously, if you can't watch the show live, it lives on YouTube. You go to the Voice of College Football channel, and of course, we invite you to subscribe, like, share this USC show, our partner USC show, Coliseum Chronicles Live. But we've debuted a Mississippi State show, a South Carolina show, a Penn State show to kind of, if you want to get a scouting report on the Nittany Lions, like our network of team-specific shows here at the Voice of College Football is growing every week. So support all these shows. I mean, if you want college football content, you want to see what's happening in other parts of the country, just stay here at the Voice of College Football and follow each new show and subscribe to support all of our channels, because we're all trying to make it work. We're all trying to build something. We have our written website, vocfb.com, where we're linking to all of these shows so that you get to just get the short summary. You get a 200-word summary of what's being talked about, but then you can actually go to the YouTube link, for a 30 or 45-minute show to see what each of these school-specific hosts are talking about. This is how you can inform yourself on the full national picture here at the Voice of College Football. All right, Ethan. So we talked plenty about recruiting, and so recruiting has been, the main story of 2025 at USC. But of course, 4 weeks away from Big Ten Media Days, it's going to be fun to, get into what the coaches are saying and what the players are saying and what the vibe is, and what when Big Ten Network covers Big Ten Media Days, what are the talking heads going to say? What's going to be the feeling in the room? So we're almost there. We're almost at talking season, for media days, and then after that is preseason camp, and away we go. And then it's football season again. So one of the things we always do in late spring, early summer, schedule analysis. And so I want to touch on something that Jeff Rodriguez said earlier in the chat, and also that Walter Clark said. Now, Jeff Rodriguez said that, with the recruits that USC is bringing in on the defensive line, with the volume that USC has, one of the things that does is you can rotate your defensive linemen. You don't have to lean on certain players for a significant majority of snaps. You can be more rotational in how you handle that. And I mentioned Walter Clark because he said earlier in the chat, we're good on the defensive line this year. Forget about next year. We're good this year. So want to kind of get your insights on those items, but connecting it to the schedule, all right? Regardless of where anyone lands on that question, whether we have sufficient defensive line depth this year or not. And when I say sufficient, I mean, I'm talking about sufficient to win 10 games, sufficient to make the playoff, because that is, of course, the goal at USC. Regardless of what you think about that point, and regardless of where you come down on that point, Ethan, I think that the conversation with the points made by Jeff and Walter is really interesting because, it brings up the idea, should this USC staff, for this USC team, not talking about 2026, talking about this year, this season, do you come into a season with a rotational approach as though that is your philosophy? Or do you come into a season thinking, we have some pace setters. We have some guys we think who can kind of establish the marker, can establish the standard, and then we kind of are going to bring in our less proven guys to kind of follow suit with fewer snaps at the beginning. We're going to kind of give them an opportunity, but we want them to kind of settle into the season. Or is it, and this is where the schedule piece comes into play, and you have two cupcakes at the start. So, are you just throwing everyone into the mix on a pretty even level those first 2 weeks? You could also do that potentially, one could argue, for the third game at Purdue, a team that's supposed to be absolutely atrocious. Do you think that the USC staff, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, should be having a rotational approach? And by rotational, I mean everyone getting pretty much the same amount of snaps? Or do you have to chop it up early in the season where, the veterans, the people who've clearly separated themselves from the twos and the threes, you need to give them more work, because not only are they your best players, but they can set the tone. They can kind of set an example that then the twos and the threes can emulate. And then in October, maybe you get more of an even mix of snaps as attrition becomes more prominent. How would you balance these different talking points and these different considerations for a coaching staff, given USC's unique situation heading into 2025?
I think I kind of really agree with what Jeff said here. I think it'll be a lot of rotation in the first 4 games. I think generally my philosophy is always get as many people as you can in the game in the early games when the stakes are a little bit lower, when you're still figuring your players out a little bit. You don't know how exactly they're going to behave in game situations. Practice and games are a lot different. You're obviously, competing hard in practice, but just the atmosphere and the challenge of matching up against opponents that you haven't been practicing against the entire offseason, that you've only seen film of, all kinds of different things leads to, and just the pressure and all that stuff. Games are an entirely different environment. So you just can't know how a player is going to perform in game unless you let them have their opportunity. So I think, in those games, you can afford to see a young defensive lineman make a mistake, not being in the right place, not, all that kind of stuff. And then, when it gets into the middle of the season, you can't afford that as much. You also want to give some of those younger, more, kind of raw, less developed, but, have the size and the theoretical skill to be stars. You want to get them the game experience, and you want to see if they can be the kind of players who can contribute for you this season. I don't think you want to, I'm always a fan also of giving those players a chance, at least a little bit in the beginning of the year, just to, see how they hold up and see if they can be contributors. I don't think dismissing a guy just because he's young is ever, the wisest idea in any sport. I think you have to, especially if these guys are some of the top recruits in the country, like test them early and just see what happens. And, you only learn by playing. That's kind of the biggest place that you learn. You're learning in practice, and, the coaches are hopefully teaching you, but when you play, that's really the best teacher. So I'd like to see what Jeff is suggesting. I'd like to see them really open up the rotation in the early games, keep people's legs fresh, let the younger guys get an opportunity, kind of see who proves it to you, who kind of proves that they can be productive in game scenarios, and then, weigh that even a little bit more heavily than what you're seeing in practice.
Okay, now, Jeff has followed up on his point by saying, if we can blow out these first few opponents, like that takes care of the issue. And if USC is able to blow the doors off these September opponents, yes, like he's absolutely correct. If USC is able to do that, then you're going to see everyone get plenty of reps. Now, here's the tension point, which we have talked about previously. And now this tension point kind of rubs up against the goal of wanting to blow out games so that you can, give lots of reps to your 2s and your 3s further down the depth chart. It's important for USC to establish running the ball like that. You believe in that, Ethan. I believe in that. USC has to be able to be more consistent. Like it's not so much that USC wasn't able to get lots of 8, 9, 10-yard carries last year. It got a lot of them, but then it also had a lot of 0 and 1-yard carries. So USC got into 2nd and 9, 2nd and 10, and that's when Lincoln Riley would throw the ball. And so he didn't stick with the running game because he was afraid of too many 2nd and 9s for this team. So like the key is not so much aggregate yards. It's average. Well, not even average yards. It's being able to hit 4, 5 yards per rush, like not as an average, but actually getting 4 or 5 yards on a rush and replicating that. That is the specific thing that USC needs to do. So the point, though, is if you're trying to establish running the ball, and that also means not putting too much on Jaden Mayava's plate in these early season games. And last week, Ethan, we had the conversation, like you don't want to show the full playbook against Purdue. You should not have to, right? You should be able to keep things pretty vanilla, pretty basic. Also, Missouri State, Georgia Southern as well. Like you don't want to be showing Illinois your better plays. You don't want to be showing Michigan and Notre Dame your better plays. You want to be able to not only win those first several games in September, but you want to keep things simple. And also running the ball means fewer total plays. So that means players are not playing as many plays in hot, some late summer weather when the weather is still warm. You're reducing injury risk, and exposure. So, like, we all want USC to blow out these first 4 opponents so that everyone gets reps. But then the goal of running the ball and the goal of reducing exposure to player injury, reducing the odds of player injury, militate against the idea that USC is going to be able to achieve blowouts. Not necessarily against Missouri State. Like against Missouri State can probably pick your number, whatever. But, like at Purdue, if you just try to run the ball and you keep things very vanilla, you might win by 17. But like the point there would be, you know what, we don't need to win that game by 45. Let's win by 17, but do it efficiently with fewer plays, and make sure we're getting out of West Lafayette healthy, which sets the table for that midsection of the season, the games against Illinois, and then the really big ones against Michigan and Notre Dame. So, Ethan, another set of considerations to juggle. Like, we all want to see USC absolutely blow the doors off these September opponents, and which would guarantee everyone getting reps. But then you also want to run the ball. You also want to be efficient. You also want players to be healthy. So how do you juggle these things? How do you think it all fits together for USC in the first month of the season?
Yeah, I mean, like I have said before, I think running the ball this year is an absolute must. And I think, especially given the way that the running back room looks now with so much talent, but not, I mean, Wayman Jordan is the number one guy. That's kind of the general consensus so far, but he's not the clear and far and away number one guy like we've had in past years. And there's a lot of other talent in the running back room that is competitive enough with him that, they're going to be, kind of earning, I'm sure, some reps as well based on their practice performance, because you have a lot more polished guys in the room this year. Not that there wasn't other talent in other years, like Lincoln Riley's complete misuse of Quentin Joyner last year is something that really frustrated me and a lot of other people. But yeah, I mean, you got to run the football. You got to establish that early for sure. And, that may mean sacrificing a couple of big quick plays where Mekhi Lemon gets open for a 70-yard touchdown. So that you can run the football a little bit more and establish that, and, not have to figure out how to establish the run against Illinois because you were just airing the ball out every down against these first 3 teams because you wanted to get to 60 points as soon as possible so that you could put all the backups in. So yeah, running, if they're, blowing teams out quickly at the cost of running the football, not the greatest sign. I want and kind of need to see them run the football. There's a lot of comments in the chat that I've seen about that, and just kind of, I think somebody asked, whether whether we thought USC was going to have a more balanced offense this year. I just found it. It was from Archer. I do, but I also did last year, and we all know how that went. So, I think a lot of us thought that as soon as Caleb Williams left, that, as Lincoln Riley, having Miller Moss, definitely in the lower tier of talent in terms of quarterbacks that he's had, you'd also put Jaden Mayava there. Jaden Mayava is not a Jalen Hurts or a Baker Mayfield or a Caleb Williams. We certainly hope that he gets there, but at this point, we have to face the reality that he's not. So you would think that because of that, he would be willing to lean more heavily on the run, but he just hasn't seemed to have gotten there yet. And part of it is the offensive line issue, kind of like you mentioned, just not having as, strong of an offensive line these past couple of years. And part of it is, maybe just too much trust in his own offensive scheme. But I think the best sign this year for that is just, number one, the depth of the running back room. Like I mentioned, they didn't just go out and get a top guy, but they just got so many guys, through the transfer portal and otherwise that, there's legitimately 4 guys that could be number 1 or number 2 running backs, at a bunch of different schools around the country. So, you would think that just because of the depth that they're planning on really using those guys and, cycling some of them in, and the run really being a lot more, highly used in that, right. But I also think that trend of Lincoln Riley getting over his smartest guy in the room syndrome hopefully is going to continue on the field as well. And, he's going to based on him like letting some other guys kind of take over some other aspects of making this a well-rounded program, I would think that he's hopefully going to kind of relinquish a little bit of needing to be the super creative, putting in the third string quarterback to run the second and goal play against Notre Dame, who's never seen the field in his 3 years of USC career, which baffled me and a lot of other USC fans when Jake Jensen saw the field in the Notre Dame game when the game was so close. Don't know why that happened, but hopefully he'll sacrifice a lot of that creativity and kind of and I think what he's seen is a more well-rounded program. It's not as flashy. It doesn't give him as much of the credit, but it is a winning program. He knows he needs to win. So I think that because of that, we'll hopefully see this year as finally the year that he kind of, relinquishes the need to run all the fancy plays and just kind of pounds the football a little bit more.
So this leads us to a Jaden Mayava discussion, and we've kind of tried to get at it in various ways, and we're obviously it's going to continue to be a discussion. I mean, the QB1 at USC is always going to be a centerpiece talking point heading into the start of the season. But I think the nuance of the discussion going on in the chat is, some people have said, if Jaden Mayava is a game manager who just makes the percentage play and lets the defense win games for this team, keeping in mind that Miller Moss threw crucial interceptions against Maryland and in other games that USC lost, just don't make the big mistake. Our defense is going to be good enough. That's one school of thought for Mayava. That just make sure that he does the responsible thing. But then there's the other element that this guy does have a higher ceiling than Miller Moss. That doesn't mean he's a better player. It means that he can do more things than Miller Moss. He's more versatile than Miller Moss. He's more dynamic than Miller Moss. Whether it's running an option play, throwing the deep ball, trusting his wide receivers to make plays on contested catches, something that Miller Moss just was reticent about doing, just was not willing to trust his guys on 50-50 balls. You do have this element of upside with Mayava. So, do you kind of lean into the upside, or do you lean into the game manager element, or is it not quite really that simple? How do you get at that question, Ethan?
I don't think it's quite that simple. I think I will say, for one thing, I think if USC wanted to take, the biggest risk at quarterback and just, based on raw talent alone, kind of throw caution to the wind and hope for the best. I mean, maybe you just put Hassan Longstreet in there in week one and, let him make some mistakes, but also let him make the plays that made him a 5-star quarterback. So, caution and polish is always a consideration. I think that it'll, be a consideration here. I think Mayava was at his best at some points when he took risks. I think if anyone wants to see kind of the best and the worst that it can get with Jaden Mayava, go back and watch the Texas A&M bowl game, because Mayava played some of the worst quarterback play I've ever seen in my life in that game, and also had some of the most exciting plays that I've seen all season, and just incredible plays from the wide receivers, and it was just this crazy duality of both of them happening at the same time. So I mean, in terms of that, he certainly needs to clean it up. Like I said, I mean, he's not the starter if USC is just wanting to risk it all at quarterback. He certainly needs to work on cleaning it up. Part of that is going to be just him gaining a little bit more experience at a Big Ten school and a Big Ten scheme. He came from the Mountain West, where you can afford to make a couple more of those silly mistakes because defenses aren't as smart, they're not as fast, they're not as big. They're not going to make you pay quite as much. So you don't need to be quite as polished. I think some of that will come naturally. And so I think that we can pretty generally expect that out of Mayava. And if we don't see that out of Mayava, it would be a pretty big disaster, just because he's had, a whole off season and so much more time to develop between, Texas A&M and then Missouri State, that if he, if starting these like Illinois games, if he's still making some of the same mistakes he was making last year, then that's like a big major concern. But I think that the likelihood of that is pretty low. But I do think that a big issue last year presented itself, especially against some of the better teams, when USC was just completely unwilling to take risks in moments that they needed to. The red zone was one big area. The Michigan game specifically is one that stands out to me, just because that was probably one of Miller Moss's better games. And the USC offense opened up so much more when Lincoln Riley let Miller Moss kind of actually throw the ball a little bit and not just hand it off for the, very strong Michigan defensive line to just completely blow up our offensive line and, drop our running back for a loss of a couple of yards. And I think that may have been my favorite game that Miller Moss ever played, actually, just because he was getting hit so much and he was still managing to get the ball out, play a relatively clean game. And, an offense that had not really moved the ball at all before halftime suddenly came alive. And, that game still didn't turn out how, we would have wanted. He ultimately couldn't make enough big plays because they couldn't make the plays on the final drive that they would have needed to put together that last gasp effort to win the game. But I think he did enough to put the defense in position to win the game. And so I think, like we said, gotta pound the football, got to, cover that area of like low risk football. We've got to be good there. But I think when you do go to the pass, especially with the talent at wide receiver this year, I think we have some great young wide receivers, but I don't think we have enough depth or quite enough proven stars at wide receiver yet, like USC's had in the past couple of years, that we can, swing the ball out to Jordan Addison or swing the ball out to Drake London and expect them to get 10 yards after the catch. Like, we need to get, especially with guys like Jacoby Lane, who are so big and, have such great ball skills, like, need to, run more downfield plays for guys like that. So I think while, taking care of the ball is certainly going to be a consideration, I think that there are certainly, and we've talked about balance a lot tonight, but I think balance is going to be a big consideration. And I do think that when Lincoln Riley goes to the pass, more downfield plays, less just screens to the sideline, a little bit more of Mayava in the pocket and, letting him extend plays with his legs and all that stuff. I certainly hope that's the case.
Well, obviously in the bowl game against Texas A&M, we saw Jaden Mayava, and you did allude to this, make a lot of really jarring mistakes. And yet, if you're at USC and if you're Lincoln Riley, you're going to ask your starting quarterback to play like a starting quarterback, right? Like, we're going to ask you to make all the throws. We're going to ask a lot of you. Like, we're not going to try and turn you into just someone who is handing the ball off, pitching the ball off. Like, that's not why you came to USC, Jaden Mayava. So I think a natural question as we wind down our show, Ethan, is, in terms of bringing Mayava along, there has to be an awareness of, okay, like, first, do no harm. First, show us you can protect the ball. Show us you can, go through an assortment of reads and handle various situations that you can make different throws with ball security, and that your reads are consistent enough and reliable enough that you're not putting the ball in jeopardy the way Miller Moss did for way too many times last season. I think the real question a lot of fans have at USC is, do you kind of put the handcuffs on Mayava early, saying, you need to work within a little bit tighter structure. We will let you air it out as the season goes along, but you kind of have to prove certain things to us first. Or, Ethan, do you just say, all right, you be you, but please, we're trusting you to make the responsible decision, and we're going to coach you up so that you're going to make these responsible decisions consistently. So do you put on the handcuffs, the first few games, or can you just not do it that way? And you just have to say, be yourself, but hey, this is how we're coaching you to play. Follow the guidelines. How do you come at that?
I think you coach him up as much as you can before those first couple of games. But I think that when you do get there, you need to instill some confidence in him and you need to let him be himself. I think one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen coaches make throughout my life, whether it's Little League baseball or, the NFL, is not instilling enough confidence in a guy so that, and just kind of coaching them up too much and kind of giving too much feedback about, what to do in given situations, so that when it comes time to, perform and it comes time to improvise, which is such a big part of sports, they're looking to the sideline or looking to the dugout, or, they just are so used to getting exactly what they need to do from their coach that, they're not ready to make up that aspect on their own. So I do think that as soon as the games start, you are hopefully at a place where you can just like be a little bit more hands off and say, hey, you've shown a lot in practice. We trust you. I think even if you don't feel that inside as a coaching staff as much, you still, kind of embellish it a little bit to their face because you want your guys to be confident. That's kind of, I'm going to go back to baseball just because I've followed a lot of baseball my whole life. And there's a trend recently in baseball where, there's a lot of different analytics in terms of, when to pitch guys against certain guys, and, analytics favor like platoons and pitching starting pitchers less, and, letting the bullpen pitch more and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of stuff that, kind of treats players like numbers and doesn't really instill as much confidence in them. And it just leads to, and, sometimes those matchups are going to work, but it leads to a lot of like players and managers not having as much of that trusting relationship, because like the player, the managers aren't listening to their players and treating their players as people. They're playing a numbers game. And, that ultimately is not what wins championships. I mean, if you want to win a championship, you need to be able to, throw your guys out there, even if the numbers don't always match up. And even if you need to instill confidence. And the championship winning teams are the teams that have guys that can go out to the same position, play every day. And, they're going to fail a lot, and they're going to fail in, situations where the numbers said that they were going to fail, but they're also going to reward you by succeeding in situations where the numbers said that they were going to fail. So I just think that confidence plays a huge, huge aspect. And I would certainly hope that they are telling Mayava that they're confident in him, that they build up that confidence in him, because I think he's a player that at times last season didn't look super confident. And I think that directly affected his play, because, there's just plays where he looked a little rushed. It's not like Mayava has a bad arm. It's not like he was throwing picks because, he was underthrowing guys because he doesn't have the arm talent. He has plenty of arm talent, plenty of, talent with his legs, a lot of raw talent. But it's just a confidence thing when you bring over a guy from, and that's always going to be a thing when you bring over a guy from a, lesser division. But just generally, like confidence is, not equally as important as skill and, and learning the offense and all that stuff, but it does play a very big role. And I think if you ignore it, you kind of do that to your own demise.
All right, folks. So we've given you an hour here at USC Trojans Primetime Live, and just want to also kind of whet your appetite for what's going to come when the season arrives. When the season's here and USC gets into game weeks, we expect to have a post-game show on the weekends. Now, whether that's right after the game on Saturday or whether it's a Sunday follow-up, we haven't decided that yet, but we are going to bring that to you here on the USC channel at the Voice of College Football, because when it's football season, we're all in, right? Ethan and I are going to be giving you the extended USC coverage that you crave. But in the off season, we cap these shows at 1 hour, and so it's on to next week. And hey, we're almost at 4th of July weekend, getting close, and then right on the other side of that is Big Ten football media day. So like the long off season is you can kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel here at the Voice of College Football. So for Ethan Inman, I'm Matt Zemek. We'll see you next week, Thursday, 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. in Los Angeles, on the USC channel for USC Trojans Primetime Live. We'll see you next week.